Kia ora, good afternoon. We'll now reconvene our council committee meeting and take item 10, which is the international travel proposed for the Deputy Mayor for December 2024, and invite the Manager for International Relations, Gabrielle Loga, to present this item. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor, through the chair. This is quite a straightforward report, so I'll take it as read and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Open it up to members if there are any questions. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Gabriella. That was very rapid and I wasn't quite ready. My question isn't particularly about the Deputy Mayor's travel. It's about the impact on the Mayor's travel of separating the two elements that were in his first lot of travel, if you see what I mean. So his first travel was in his capacity as chair of the Sister Cities organisation. Does that still qualify as on-council business? This is the expenses policy, so it might be more for governance than it is for you.
Yeah.
But.
Through you, Mr. Chair,
Sure.
this might be a bit of a to and fro with Gabrielle and myself. My understanding is the Mayor is chair of Sister Cities New Zealand by lieu of being a mayor in the first place. Would that be accurate? So I think in his position as mayor, he has been elected to be the chair of that organisation. So I would suggest it would still be council business.
Even though there's no benefit to. So in my read of the expenses policy, it talks specifically about Sister Cities delegations, and my read of that would be, was it in our thinking that those were our sister cities, not just anybody's sister cities?
So, through the chair, the mayor has been invited to attend the China International Friendship Cities Conference in his capacity as the chair of Global Cities New Zealand, but it is also a very good opportunity for Palmerston North to be represented at such an International Friendship Cities Conference.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just following on from Councillor Bowen's question about that, the Mayor's visit to China. What was the cost of that trip? Sorry, I can't recall.
So, as our event organizers for the conference in China has proposed that they cover all of his cost,
Okay.
but Council has approved that should some incidental costs occur, then we will cover up to 1,500 for the Mayor's travel.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and that's referenced in the minutes that we approved earlier in the earlier item. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Gabrielle. So in 2.8, you talk about, I guess, the benefits of the travel, and you say that this would contribute to an increase in the number of international visitors to the city. Do you have any means of measuring that?
Through the chair, this is a very interesting question, and I'm glad you asked that, because we have been looking at ways to measure success of international relations activities, and though we don't have a mechanism to measure the number of international visitors to the city, we do have a mechanism to measure the international electronic card spending in the city, which is very encouraging, because the last quarter or the most recent economic report, it's increased by 15.8%.
So can you, that's great, can you track that down to the country level or the region level? Or how can you, or is it just any international visitor?
Any international visitors. I'm afraid that CIDA and our city economist hasn't got that tools in hands to break it down to such detail level yet.
Okay, so when you say it would contribute to an increase in the number of international visitors to the city, That's what you're hoping for, but you haven't got any way of being sure of that.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Gabrielle. There's no further questions, so thank you for presenting and responding to the questions on this item. I'm happy to move the recommendations in the report and that are on the screen and seconded by Councillor Hapeta, and open it up for any debate. Councillor Naylor.
Oh, I have to stand up. Thank you. I'm happy to approve these recommendations, but just want to make a couple of comments about our international activity in general. Whilst we have approved, the majority of council approved, you know, I think over $500,000 budget for this year for international relations, this sort of activity will continue. And these visits that are outlined in this paper are actually quite small in terms of the financial investment from our community. However, I'm just really mindful about the amount of time that this activity actually takes, and perhaps the meetings that aren't attended by the Mayor or potentially the Deputy Mayor, which I think is also important in terms of the representation from our community. So I think we just need to be mindful of that. Just as a little bit aside to the actual recommendations, which I'm happy to support, but going forward, I recall the budget was proposed to be reduced, but that failed eight all. Perhaps it's something for us to think about next year, not just in terms of the financial impact to our community, but the time lost in terms of having our Mayor present for actually sometimes really important decisions.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to encourage the international team to focus on tangible outcomes. I think it's fine to say, well, this is going to improve our relations with this particular city. This is going to advertise Palmerston North as a tourist destination or whatever. But if we could actually have some quantifiable outcomes, it would help us to determine whether or not these are valuable programs that need to continue. So in 2.8, we've got an indication that the visit would lead to an increase in number of international visitors to the city. And in 2.9, we've got opening the doors for new educational partnerships and the number of international fee-paying students in Palmerston North. So those are things that can be counted. So I'd encourage the team to look at ways of being able to collect that data and then present it back to us so that we can justify the continuing expenditure in international relations. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hapeta.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Happy to support this, and I think in 2.2 it's good to see the partnerships that this organisation has got with the City Council. So to know that ASI has a partnership already, and that you're strengthening that partnership going forward, and that the City Council is strengthening those partnerships going forward. So thank you for the work that you have done, and it's good to see the Deputy Mayor is going over to do that to strengthen these partnerships. So I appreciate that as a councillor, and appreciate the work that you are doing. So thank you very much, and I do support this going forward.
Thank you, councillors. I'll just add a comment in full support of these recommendations, noting that this is for incidental costs up to $1,000, that the large part of the expenses for this has been covered, and our commitment to international cities and the international relationships has been quite clear for this council, notwithstanding the individual views being expressed with concern. So appreciate this is that's all. I'll conclude with those comments, and like to invite a vote. Thank you. That is passed unanimously, 10 votes for. Invite the Deputy Mayor back.
Thank you, Councillor Dennison, and thank you, everyone. We're moving, upon discussion with the Manager of Governance, we are going to go into item number 9, so it's a slight adjustment from what I'd said just prior to lunch. And therefore, I'm going to ask the Manager of Governance to, that was the one you pointed to.
It was, Madam Chair. This is just an administrative.
Sorry.
With reflection, because I'm the one nominated, I'll declare an interest and remove myself from this item.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dennison. And item number 9. Thank you. I'll ask Hannah if she can make the presentation now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is quite administrative, so I wasn't going to speak to it other than to say the Mayor's recommendation is before you in the paper.
Thank you, and I'm happy to, I take the paper as being read. I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Hancock. I think it's really important that we have representation from councillors. I know that when this came up at our last meeting, we determined that we wanted to have an elected member on the council as well. And so the Mayor has made his recommendation, and I think that both the Mayor and Councillor Dennison will represent the council's viewpoints and objectives very well on that committee, on that steering group. Any comments? Questions, shall I say? Yes. Councillor Johnson?
How long is the appointment for?
Through you, Madam Chair, it's in the wording there of the resolution or recommendation in
sorry.
front of you until the end of this term of council.
Okay. Sorry, I was reading through the report itself. I hadn't read the recommendation well enough. Thank you.
Thank you. No further comment or questions? I'll ask that we go to a vote. Thank you. And we have 10 people who voted. So, okay. Oh, okay. Thank you. We've captured that. So that's passed unanimously. Ka pai. Thank you. With regards to item 8, I'd like to move that to, given that there are names of individuals in there and for privacy reasons, move that into part 2. That's the Central Economic Development Agency Board appointments. But we'll deal with that when we go to part 2. Ah, yes, very good. We'll vote at that point. I've had instructions from the Manager of Governance.
Yeah, so when we go at the end of the afternoon, before we move into part 2, at that point we'll discuss whether we take it part 1 or part 2.
Kia ora everyone, I hope I didn't jump the gun there, but I think I did. The advice I've received is that we will hold that to the end and then we will discuss whether we take it into part 2 or not. Kate Pine? Councillor Johnson?
Thanks, Madam Chair. When will we have the opportunity to ask questions about the decision to move it to part 2?
Are you happy for me to answer that, Madam
Yes.
Chair? So the plan is that we move item 8 to the end of our afternoon of part 1. At that point, you can make a decision whether you wish to move it into part 2. Otherwise, we'd end up taking 2 votes about moving into part 2.
Okay, so before we take the vote to move it to part 2 or not, that's the opportunity we'll have to ask questions about
Yes.
the decision to move it to part 2,
Yes.
given that it's already in the public domain.
Yes.
Kia ora, item 11, submission on the toll proposal for Te Ahua Tūranga Highway, Manawatu Tararua Highway. I invite James McGill, Senior Transport Planner, to come forward. Thank you, James.
Good afternoon. So this submission and this paper is a follow-up from the notice of motion raised by Councillor Barrett at the 18th of September Economic Growth Committee, in which the committee resolved to submit on Te Ahua Tūranga in opposition to the proposed toll. Alongside that, there was also a second motion to indicate that as a council we in principle support tolling, just not in the case of Te Ahua Tūranga. So in the case of the submission that we've drafted up, what we've tried to do is kind of highlight the key issues we saw that were identified with Te Ahua Tūranga and tolling that, and contrast that against tolling that we might support. And so that's that second list within the submission, is indicating what considerations NZTA should be making before they do tolling. I'll open, happy to take comments, questions, sorry.
Kia ora, thank you, James. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, James. Just a couple questions. In my read of the submission, it doesn't indicate that there is a vote of council on this matter. Is that typical to omit that information when there has been a vote?
I might refer to John O to answer this one.
Through the chair, my understanding is when generally the convention has been in the past is where a submission has been through council and voted on council, but the assumption is that the government knows that it has been endorsed by council. But are we happy to we're happy to put something in there that's explicit if that's what you'd like to do, as opposed to a submission that is signed off by the CE before it goes down to Wellington, and we provide it for information such as the earthquake prone building report we're about to talk to later.
Great, thanks. Would that be able to happen just as a matter of course, or do we need to take a vote on that?
Through the chair, there is obviously the second recommendation, as well as for the mayor and deputy mayor to make some other minor modifications if you choose to do so. We're probably happy to just take some direction on it, but as John O's pointed out, it's not normal for us to do that. But if you wanted to have those sorts of things included, we're happy to take that on board.
Thank you. Just wanted to understand as well whether officers would be or have submitted on O2NL.
No, we haven't prepared a submission for O2NL. So what we could do potentially is there's a couple options. So the Regional Council has prepared a pretty lengthy submission on O2NL or Otaki for North Levin. Their view is they are supportive of it, given that it is different circumstances compared to Te Ahua Tūranga. So we could potentially indicate our support behind that, or we could potentially look to prepare a submission of our own, or add commentary to this submission in this paper to indicate Council's position on O2NL. Just need some direction about whether Council would support O2NL or not.
Great, thanks for outlining where things are at with that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, James. In writing the submission, I guess what was the basis of the points that you put forward?
So the starting point was the conversation and the notice of motion that was raised, and so what we've got before us was essentially rewritten the day before it had to be approved, because we'd gotten the tolling assessments the day before, and so it was edited to kind of pick up some of the, I guess, flaws we identified with that tolling assessment. And so it's a bit of a balance between those two elements.
So there were a couple of issues around the tolling assessment that are included in the submission. I guess that, weren't able to be debated at the time because we didn't have the tolling assessment. So they're around the traffic movements and the diversion rate. What about the proposed toll itself? Because in 3, you've put, after reviewing the tolling assessment, it's not clear how this rate is justified. So how did you come to that conclusion from the tolling assessment?
It was looking at the tolling assessment and the information that was provided, and we consider that to be really limited in terms of explaining why it was such a high rate compared to the comparisons of the existing toll roads in Tauranga and Auckland.
So there wasn't enough information in it, you felt, to be able to justify that level of tolling?
Correct.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. One last question around the authorised to approve amendments. Normally a recommendation says authorised to approve minor amendments. Is there some reason why minor was missed out?
No particular reason why that would have been left out. Yeah.
Because in theory, that might open the door to a completely different submission as it's written. So I wonder if I can signal an amendment, or maybe someone could be thinking about putting that in. Thank you. Thank you.
The mover and seconder can pick that up. Councillor Johnson, thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, James, for the draft submission. I'm generally happy. My only hesitation was over the strength of number 5, which is about the non-toll alternatives. No disagreement with what you say. You say both are unreliable connections subject to frequent closures. I just wondered if we could strengthen that by saying even at the moment as currently operated and maintained by NZTA. So we don't anticipate that getting better when they're under the control of local authorities. Would it be possible to strengthen that slightly?
Certainly, we can look at strengthening that.
You don't need a recommendation for it, you can just do that.
No.
Good, thanks.
Kaupai. I'm very happy to move this, both. Thank you, Councillor Dennison. And to include the word minor in there as well. Thank you. Any comments? Thank you, Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, just to say that I was very happy to see this submission being so clear, and I'm happy to approve it and support it. I think it's really important that the point that is made, I'm just trying to see where it is, it doesn't have a number against it, but the point after point 7, the paragraph, says that PNCC also expressed significant concern that the tolling assessment was not made available to the public when the consultation opened. And I think that that is a real flaw in this process, that lots of people will have already made submissions on this tolling proposal without having the tolling assessment. And as the officer explained, and as we can see from the submission, there are at least 3 points in our submission that relate to the tolling assessment that show what a weak case there is for tolling, both in terms of the number of vehicles going through the road, the diversion rate, and in terms of the justification for the cost of the toll. Now, none of that information was available to members of the public who, up till now, have been putting their submissions in over the last few weeks. So I think that I'm pleased to see that in there, but I think that's a very important point in our submission. And it's important for members of the public to realise that now the tolling assessment is available, you know, that they might need to reconsider their submission or add to it. Because what kind of a process is it? Well, you don't have the information to comment on until almost near the end. I could suggest what sort of a process it is, but perhaps I won't.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I think that's not the only example of that, is it? So I appreciate your comments. Councillor Barrett?
Thank you, Madam Chair and colleagues. And firstly, congratulations and thanks to officers for writing up quite a clear expression of the rather extensive conversation that we had in the chamber only shortly ago. In terms of the questions that I raised, you know, from my point of view, it would be worth including a note that indicates within this body of submission that there was a vote of council. Yes, it's a matter of public record. Yes, the government should be well aware of that. But I think if some member of the public were to stumble across this, you know, it'd just be helpful for them to understand that it had been through the chamber as well. So be supportive of seeing that come through in the minor amendments. Thanks as well for the update around where thinking is around O2NL. I think that's quite consistent with certainly my personal views on that, and I think it's appropriate that we should be submitting on that as a council, either in tandem with Horizons or on our own. But overall, a well-written submission. I think it signals many of the themes that we'll no doubt hear again this evening from the wider community in Ashurst and that have been being discussed quite regularly within the community to date. I'll be helping chair the meeting tonight, so I won't have a chance to actually comment at the meeting, so I thought I'd comment here instead. Just to say, I think, you know, at this point in the journey, I actually have a reasonably optimistic view of this, in that I think there's quite a big opportunity here for a political consensus to emerge around how we do investment for future roads and the role that tolls would play in that. We saw that in council. We had a couple hours of debate around whether or not the toll should go ahead on Te Ahuaturanga, and then we had about 20 seconds to say, yep, O2NL and the rest go for it. You know, so I think there is a really clear break there. And, you know, we've seen that in the community. There's been a sustained outcry against the Te Ahuaturanga proposal. In contrast, it's been a shrug or even a nod around O2NL. So I think that, you know, the wise message for government here, and, you know, it's a shame that Councillor Wood isn't in the room because he's got them all on speed dial. But, you know, there's actually a really good opportunity here to just step this particular proposal back and usher in a political consensus around how we actually do big, significant infrastructure investments in this country in the future. That would be a great legacy for this government to leave. The flip side of that is actually entrenching a lot of bitterness and a lot of anger in a specific community for a very small reward. And I would say that that would be a very poor legacy indeed. So I do hope the government begins to pay attention to the sustained voice here in the Manawatu that is very opposed to Te Ahuaturanga, but is actually reasonably open for the future. O2NL, obviously the nearest future, and I think we just signed off an investment for a business case, so we might be thinking about that too. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. And just in closing, before we move to vote on this, I just want to say both you and Councillor Johnson were very articulate, so I don't need to add any more, but I support your comments as well. Nō reira, tēnā koutou. Can I please ask that we be at the ready to vote on this? Thank you. On that the Council approve the submission on the toll proposal for Te Ahuaturanga, Manawatu, Tararua Highway included as attachment 1 and 2, that the Mayor and Deputy Mayor be authorised to approve minor amendments to the submission on the toll proposal for Te Ahuaturanga, Manawatu, Tararua Highway prior to lodgement with the NZTA Waka Kotahi. Thank you. And that has passed unanimously? No, there's someone missing.
I'm going to wake up this afternoon. Let's run
Was I a bit too, well, to run that again, I might have been too fast. Was I too fast then? Thank you. So we'll do that again, team. Is anyone? It's all right, with systems go. Thank you. That is passed unanimously. Thank you very much. Where am I at now? Sorry. Okay. And now I'm going to call on, we're looking at item number 12, submission on earthquake-prone buildings, deadlines and bills. Welcome, Keegan, our senior planner. And both item 12 and item 13 are for our noting, but Keegan, I'll allow you to talk to item number 12. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you. My name's Keegan Aplinthane, Senior Planner in the City Shaping team. I'm delighted to present the submission, albeit retroactively, on the earthquake-prone deadlines and other matters bill. You'll note that it's quite light. The main thrust of it being light is that there's not a lot of detail at this stage in this bill. It's very much a bill to buy everybody some time until a full review of the earthquake-prone building system is kick-started later this year and then towards midway through next year. This has been submitted on the 26th of August under delegation. Just the reporting timelines with council didn't quite align with the consultation, quite tight consultation period, unfortunately. But the main thrust of our submission is that we support the extension of timeframes of 4+ years for earthquake-prone building owners, and we look forward to the review of the earthquake-prone buildings system, given we're at quite high risk in this area and have a high interest with about 200 odd earthquake-prone buildings at the moment. So through the chair, I'll be available to take questions.
Keegan, it doesn't look like anyone has any questions. So thank you very much, Keegan. And I'm happy to move that the council receive the memorandum titled Submission on Earthquake-Prone Buildings Deadlines Bill. Thank you, Councillor Dennison has seconded that. Any comments? Okay, can I please ask that we move though, that we vote on that? Thank you. That is passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to item 13, submission on smoke-free environments and regulated products, amendment bill number 2, and I invite to come to the front Lily Kato, who is our policy analyst. Welcome, Lily. And when you're ready. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou, here to present the submission of the Smoke-Free Environments and Regulated Products Amendment Bill. This was this submission was signed under delegated authority by the Mayor, and I will just say after the submission was sent through to this Health Select Committee, the very next day they extended the consultation period to the 4th of October, which is this Friday. So just noting that, but the submission that the Mayor signed is with the Select Committee now. Take the report as read and happy to answer any questions.
We don't have any questions, Lily. Thank you for that. I'm happy to move that, seconded by Councillor Dennison. Thank you, Councillor. Any comments? Okay, with that, can I ask that we please vote? And that has passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to item number 14, and I'm going to ask the Manager of Governance, Hannah, if she could talk to this particular report, that paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm generally happy just to take questions on this item, noting that there was a motion that was put to the table last month, which was then tabled until this paper came. So if there was, I'm aware that Councillor Meehan's not here, but if there was anyone that wanted to investigate further, we could do that as a part of this item.
Are there any questions? Yes, Councillor Naylor.
Thanks. Just one question around 2.2, which is the annual budget process for next year. It said that the annual budget is to be considered on the 12th of February. I'm just wondering then what the 5th of February council meeting is for. Is that just for other business not related to the annual budget?
It is essentially for Water Done Well business.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, doesn't look like we have any further questions. I'm happy to move this. Thank you, Councillor Dennison. Any comments? No? Thank you. Can I please, oh, sorry, Councillor, no. No further comments, so could we please, Councillor Fitzgerald, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, it's a challenge for me in this setting my 3-year calendar at the beginning of our term. And if you're going to move to Thursday meetings, then I'm likely going to have to step away from council. So just thought I'd share that with you.
Councillor Naylor.
Just briefly, wanting to acknowledge governance for the work involved in putting this together, because I know there's a lot of factors to consider, and it appears from what I can see that those factors have all been considered, so thanks to the staff that have put the work in here.
Thank you. Any further comments? Okay. I'm going to ask that we please put that to the vote. And that has passed 12 votes to 1. Thank you. I'm going to ask Hannah to address the late paper on National Award of 2024 JC Trust Travelling Fellowship.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So yeah, this is the late item, additional award of the JC Travelling Fellowship. So this was a request that came from the JC Trust Travelling Fellowship selection panel. So potentially any questions may not be to myself, but may be to the Chair, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. I don't think we have any comments, none that I can see at this moment in time. I'm happy to move that, given that we do have the funding, the resourcing there to support this, and that Councillor Johnson and those other selection panel members had recommended this. Seconder, thank you, Councillor Dennison. Any comments? Councillor Johnson.
I just thought it'd be worth emphasising that this is not ratepayer money, and Thank you. That this is not ratepayer money. This is a trust that council took over the administration of when the trustees themselves stepped away. So it was put in the kind of care of council, and so we administer the trust, but the money is not ratepayer money. So just thought it might be worth saying that.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson, and a very generous gift too. I believe that we're the sole beneficiaries of that, you know, to administer it to those who get benefits of this wonderful fellowship. So, any other comments with that? No? Let's go to the vote. Thank you. Item 15. That'll give Hannah time to make her way down to the table as well. So if we have a look at the work schedule, are there any, the recommendation is that council receive its work schedule dated the 2nd of October 2024. Do we have any questions of officers regarding that? Councillor Naylor? Oh no. If not, I'm happy to move that, seconded by Councillor Dennison, and we'll vote on that. Thank you. And that has been passed unanimously. Can I please ask that we go to item number 9? Not 9. Yep. Item number 8. Thank you. Thank you, Hannah. That is that the council receive its... No. Hannah, would you like to talk to this? Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I understood that you were interested in deferring this item into part 2.
That is correct.
And there were some questions from the floor before we went to that, so I'm happy to answer those.
Councillor Johnson.
Why do we need to consider this in part 2?
Do you want...
You have the option to consider in this in part 2 or part 1. If you took this in part 2, it would potentially be because you wanted to ask some questions about the suitability of the candidates that are being presented to you by the Electoral College, and you would want to be protecting their privacy if you were doing so.
So if we were discussing the policy itself, would there be any reason to do that in part 2?
No.
Okay. I'll save it for comment.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor? Oh, sorry, Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in regards to comparisons to item 20, which was the appointments to council-controlled organisations, which is in part 2, how is this item seen to be any different to have this in the part 1 arena?
The initial discussion on this CEDA paper was held in part 1 back in March, so this was seen as a continuation of that. That would be my first point. The second reasoning behind initially putting this in part 1 was that all 3 members who are being considered or who are being recommended by the Electoral College for reappointment are current members of the CEDA board, and therefore their names and their role as board members is very public.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Naylor?
Thanks. Yeah, I think it probably is worth asking this question. Given the recommendations in this report do go against the policy, do you believe that there would be some public interest in us discussing the process and the policy publicly?
When you make a decision to take any item in part 2, you're always weighing the public interest against the Section 7 reasons that you have under the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act. You're always weighing those up. So is the public interest equal to or more than the reason that you might be using? So that's the question you need to ask yourself.
Cool. Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay. In terms of like this handout, I was approached by someone saying they felt that it should go into part 2. Do we go to a vote?
To advise you from here, Madam Chair, what we would do is put the mover could put that we move this item into part 2. We could vote on that, and then I think we should then take the other decisions on moving to part 2, which are already in the agenda as part 2, as a separate motion, and then we can either take this item in part 1 and then move into part 2, or move all of it to part 2. Clear as mud. I'll pop up that end.
Yes. Do I have anyone prepared to move this into part 2? Councillor Dennison. So Councillor Dennison, thank you.
Madam Chair, yeah, I'll move that we consider this in part 2 and do look for a seconder. But just speaking to the... Is there a seconder? That's a fair question. No. Okay,
Yes.
happy not to.
Okay,
You
so
would?
I was looking for a mover.
I'm moving.
And I'm happy to second that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem like it's going to have much support, would be my indication. So perhaps I won't need to spend too long on the merits, but really the parallel, I was surprised to see it in part 1, and particularly when I saw item 20, the council-controlled organisations being in part 2. I've seen these very much in the same vein, but otherwise I'm going to just leave it to this vote. It seems pretty straightforward.
Thank you. Comments on that? Councillor Naylor?
Yeah, just rising to quickly explain why I will be opposing moving this to part 2. I think governance has given some good, clear rationale for why it was put in part 1 in terms of the fact that those members are already current board members. And my comfort level in terms of believing that there is some public interest in this is that the recommendations do go against our council policy, and I've seen this happen a few times. Sorry, I thought I heard a noise. So I think given that there will be some discussion on the policy and proposals, I understand there will be some additional recommendations about us looking at that policy. I think that would be of value to remain in part 1.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I personally think it should go into part 2. I think the policy does need to be looked at, and as a member of the Electoral College, I actually did raise that as a member of the Electoral College in the discussions with the Electoral College members, so I do agree with you all about the policy and that it should be reviewed. There was a feeling like I should be in part 2 having this discussion, but there was pushback from other members of the Electoral College from another district. If I put it that way, for I'm not really supposed to speak about this because we're supposed to, but we're not in part 1. But anyway, I'm just talking frankly because I can, because I'm in part 1. So that was the pushback, and but I do think our policy needs to be looked at, and so I'm trying to speak frankly without speaking frankly. But that was our pushback. It was coming from another district. Okay, but I'm going to support it going into part 2 so that we can actually speak even more frankly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am opposed to this moving into part two. Two reasons. Firstly, the information is already in the public domain, so the privacy reason given there, that ship has sailed, and also that some of my concerns with this report are some red flags with process in terms of how we're appointing directors, and I think moving to part two continues to reduce that transparency. I think if it's policy we're discussing, we've got to keep it out in the open, especially when it's public money and publicly appointed positions. So I'd prefer that this stay in part one.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, I won't be supporting this moving to part two. We're being asked to make a decision here in opposition to our policy on reappointments and in opposition to a decision we've already made as a council earlier this year. And I think if there's a good reason for that, then everybody needs to be able to hear it. It's got nothing to do with the individuals themselves. So there's that. The other point is that, you know, quite often since I've come onto council, when we've been looking at CCO appointments, we've had letters from the boards of the CCOs saying, you know, how much they value a certain person and how they very much like this person to be reappointed, etc. And from time to time, I've raised the question with other elected members to say, well, should we not just reappoint this person? I've been told very, very firmly, no, we always go out to the open market as that's the only fair way to do it, etc., etc. So I'm struggling to see why we wouldn't do that here. So I'm definitely not going to support having this decision behind closed doors. I think it's very important that we discuss it openly.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Denison, do you want to speak to this? No, I have a feeling we might know. Can I please ask that we go to a vote? Thank you. This is a vote for, just for this item going into part two. Thank you. And it failed, so we will be discussing this in part one. 6 for and 7 against. Thank you. And I'll just give Hannah some time to get down to the other side of the tables. Thank you.
Good, I know. So we're discussing item 8 on page 27 of your public agenda, councillors, and you have 2 of the Electoral College members who are part of that panel on your behalf in the room. That's Councillor Harpeter and Councillor Denison. And the Electoral College is a setup of when you first established the Central Economic Development Agency, and you have a series of agreements with Manawatu District Council, from which the Electoral College has 3 members from each of those councils upon it, the mayor of both councils and 2 members appointed by those councils. And that Electoral College is responsible for making recommendations to the councils on the appointments to the CEDA board. And Manawatu District Council is considering this same paper tomorrow. So in the past we've obviously had a joint committee that has considered matters of CEDA under delegation, or potentially not under delegation, discussed them as a committee but then recommended them up, adding an extra layer before a council decision. In this case we don't have a joint committee anymore, so were the council of Palmerston North to make a different decision to Manawatu District Council tomorrow, we would be back at the drawing board where the Electoral College would need to be called to come up with another recommendation to bring to the councils. With that background, there was initiation from this council almost a year ago now to lessen the number of members on the CEDA board. Both councils agreed to do that, and the legal documentation around that was changed to address that. So we moved to between 4 to 6 members, and with the idea that ultimately the number of members on the CEDA board would drop over time. Manawatu District Council has continued to identify that yes, they are on board with that direction of travel, And the recommendation from the Electoral College in this instance would mean you'd have a total of 5 members on that board, remembering that you could have a minimum of 4. The other piece of background is, of course, the policy itself. So, yes, we are also considering later this afternoon the appointments for some of our cultural CCOs and also for the airport. Those appointments are under Palmerston North's appointment of directors policy. These appointments here are under that joint agreement which is specific to CEDA. So the appointments policies are different. They are in the same tone though. So when we're discussing the policies, just be aware that they are a little bit different. The Mayor of Manawatu District Council has indicated that Manawatu is very keen to consider the policy in the shorter term and to consider adjustments to it. And my understanding is that she will be speaking to that tomorrow at Manawatu District Council's meeting. If that were a direction of travel that we also came to today, my team would consider probably both of our appointments policies in tandem in the new year in our work program. I think that's enough of a pre-talk and I will answer any questions.
Thank you, Hannah. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Hannah. So in 2.4, you say that the policy sets out that vacancies are to be advertised with reappointment without a competitive process to occur only in exceptional circumstances. So do you consider that we've got an exceptional circumstance here?
The reasons that the Electoral College have given are what is presented in recommendation 4, that they would like to ensure the continuity of strategic direction. It would be my professional opinion that that is not an exceptional circumstance, which is why I didn't point you to the exceptional circumstances piece of the policy. I pointed you to a different section of the policy, which is exceptions to the policy, and that is also allowable. So that as long as you note that this is against your usual practice, you are absolutely allowed to do that within the bounds of this policy.
Okay, I'll reserve my comment on that to comment time. So in general, when we set out to advertise vacancies, what are the reasons that are given for doing that?
If I have a look at what your policy itself says, it doesn't give you the reasons, it just sets out this is the process. The process being that you want to make sure that you've got the correct skills and knowledge and experience that are required for the work that you need your board to achieve. And that you will assess candidates against exactly that, against the skills, knowledge and experience that might be needed. That would include things like the board dynamics and stakeholder relationships, the demographic and geographic diversity of your board, the capacity of applicants to do their board work and any succession planning.
So if we were to advertise and it turned out that we didn't get any better candidates coming forward, there's no problem with reappointing the people who are in position at that time, is there?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you. Ngamihi Hannah. I was taking a close read of that policy as well, and it does also state at 3.8D that any reappointments without a full appointment process must be for a duration of 6 months or less. Is there been anything from the Electoral College as why we're contravening that clause?
No, because instead of that clause is under the section of using exceptional circumstances, which is not what we're suggesting we use in this instance.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And also have here, you were talking about the reason given has been continuity of strategic direction. I understood from the policy that rotating a third of the board every 3 years is the structure that's intended to maintain continued strategic direction. What's different about this case that's not being met?
I think what's different about this case is these 3 members, all 3 of them have only been on the board since 2021 and one of them since 2022, so they haven't been in there for a very long time. The policy itself expects that someone could be on there for 9 years, so I think it's within the bounds of reason.
Thank you. In the report from the 6th of March, it was the reason given for reappointing was and avoiding a full and fair appointment process was that it would tide us over so we could do a full and fair appointment process this time. And the advice from the college is that we just don't need to do that.
So when we put that paper up in March, it came to PNCC first, it then went to Manawatu District Council. They had quite a fulsome discussion about it and actually tabled it and took it back to another full meeting of council. At that point, they made an additional resolution. Instead of agreeing what we had, they resolved that the Electoral College meet and discuss. And so that put ours on pause, and that's what's happened, and that's why the Electoral College met in August, and as a result of that conversation, all 6 members of the Electoral College agreed that this was the best way forward.
Great, thank you. One last one was that you also mentioned that continuity of strategic direction was given as the reason. From my reading of the report, the main reason given was that the college wanted to express gratitude to the existing members. Is gratitude anywhere accepted as an acceptable reason to deviate from the policy?
Potentially, I've insinuated something in the report which I may not have meant to.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Thanks, Madam Chair. 2 questions. Hannah, please. 2.3 talks about $25,000 that had been allocated to board fees being reallocated to general funding, but recommendation 3 says the operational grant remains unchanged.
Yes, so the total amount, so it's just a wording, and if Scott had been in the room, maybe I'd been told I've used the wrong wording, but the total amount that sits in both budgets from both councils remains unchanged of what we give to CEDA to do its things. That was separate, there was a total amount inside there that was separated for board fees. That is now lesser, but the total amount that is being granted to CEDA remains the same.
Thanks for clarifying. And then second question, and again, this is process niggle, but in 2.4, you say the decision is to be recorded by way of resolution, which should include the reason for deviation. Thus, recommendation 4 notes the recommendation to proceed without advertising and the reasons, but it doesn't note, and should it, that we are not complying with the policy. Do we have to note the decision to not comply with the policy?
Under the LGA, that would be good practice, yes.
So can we amend recommendation 4 to note that this is a deviation from our policy?
The mover could certainly put that.
I think that would be good practice. Otherwise, I'm happy to move it as an amendment.
We're just in questions at the moment. We haven't moved in.
Okay, thank you. That's all for me.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thanks. Just you mentioned that the MDC Mayor was going to consider changes to the policy. Are you aware of what those changes may entail? Is that to make it more specific? Or?
I think the direction is going to be that jointly we look at the policy and see are both sides comfortable that this is how we want to run our process.
Okay, and just in terms of sorry, I haven't got the policy in front of me, but you mentioned that this process would be exceptions to the policy. Are exceptions outlined in the policy, or what situation?
The definition of exception?
I mean, what circumstances would justify an exception to the policy?
No, it just says that you can and how to do that.
Okay. Thank you.
There are no further questions. Therefore, do we have a mover and a seconder for this? Thank you.
The deviation from the current policy, I think it's been suggested by Councillor Bowen, but I'm happy to incorporate that.
Thank you, Councillor Dennison, and that's noted.
From the current policy, yeah.
And seconder, Councillor Hapeta.
And speak to it, if that's okay.
Yes.
Yep. So, hey, thank you for those queries, and I think it's, good attention to the process that we did. It was sure raised during the deliberations and the recommendations that our policy position has been pretty consistently clear to go to market, notwithstanding that was not really seen as being the position when we felt that we had 3 worthy candidates of reappointment to give consistency to the strategic direction. And so on this, Manawatu District Council were very clear on their view, that would be fair to say. And really there was an acceptance that the board's operating fairly well. These 3 have been there on their first rotation, and that the importance for CEDA for this region to have consistency was highlighted quite clearly in the arguments to put this recommendation forward. The arguments around the rationale behind that, probably we didn't flesh that out with a whole bullet point arguments around their benefits and what they've offered, but we do acknowledge that Bobby O'Fee is the chair and been giving quite a presence to the CEDA board from that governance body. She's been very active in the community, was one of the notes that were well accepted, presenting not only to council but other forums and other events. So I think the representation there was very strong, and that was weighted quite clearly, that we've given that as the extended time for the 2027 period. And the other 2 have been fair contributors, and their resumes are pretty strong. And there was thought for a second term of giving a growth to their leadership and their effectiveness of understanding our objectives of what we're wanting to achieve collectively was seen as weighting quite strong. And therefore, the argument to not go to market, realising it's against the current policy, was decided and actually agreed at the meeting. It did raise the question around our policy, and it's come up several times offline conversations around the need to, or suggestion at least, to review it and add some flexibility to it rather than going to market every time. And in this case, the 2 points I want to add is it was considered the policy whether we need to go to market. I'm not saying that we just totally had that not in frame. It would be fair that Leonie and I both raised that in the deliberations as being a concern that we might have to be looped back around the loop. So, you know, if that is the outcome today, that's not as if that was raised as a risk. But what I'd plead with you today is that do we go around the loop of it for the sake of having candidates that are available for reappointment and going to the market that how much do you value the experience of what they've contributed to date and to leverage off that to gain additional benefit versus bringing in some new incumbents alongside? Notwithstanding the continuity of giving some transition, I'll take that point, but I think, you know, we've got a three weighted vote on this, and the district seemed pretty clear, and to get a majority across on a district that seemed pretty strongly in their position is their fair representation to the Electoral College, representing their district view. You know, we just kind of, let's appreciate that that's the structure that we set up. And so, in respect, I think there's some pragmatism to kind of work together collectively for an effective outcome. And therefore, I think 5 being noted as the decision will not take effect, I think that's very valid. I think it's very fair. I think it is a deviation from policy. We're not denying that. So without repeating myself, I would just suggest that I still stand here with confidence to recommend these 3 candidates to us for reappointment. And happy with either outcome or where we end up. But yeah, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dennison. Councillor Johnson. Oops, sorry, it's Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To me, this is an issue of fairness and transparency. It's not at all related to the 3 incumbents' role, but we're in no position to be able to say that we've got the best people for the job. And we've actually gone out to see who else is available. And, you know, we invest a huge amount of money every year into CEDA. They have a very important role. You know, acknowledge that Manawatu District Council also has a contribution. They have equal votes on the Electoral College, but they have a substantially smaller financial contribution. And to my mind, I don't see a compelling reason why we shouldn't go out to market. If there is a better person out there who comes forward, then that will be an advantage both to Cedar and to the city and the district. If there isn't, then people can be reconfirmed in their positions, and we can all be secure in the knowledge that we've got the very best people for the job that are available. I don't quite understand why the district is so set on reappointing. But to my mind, we're dealing with public funds here. We're dealing with people who are publicly appointed to do a role for the community. And we need to be sure that we're following our own policy, which was set for a reason. I'm not sure that I support a change in the policy, to be honest. I understand that the CCO appointments are our own kind of like council process and that this is a joint council process, but the same principles of fairness and transparency apply. And I'm really uncomfortable with this. We've already made the decision as a council that we didn't want to do this. And now it's gone to the Electoral College, and now they've basically ignored the decision of this council to come back and say, oh no, have another go at this. You didn't give us the right answer the first time round. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not buying it. I think it's very important that we go out on the open market, openly, transparently and fairly, and see who's available. And if there's no one better, great. These people can be reconfirmed. If there is someone better, where's the harm? Where's the disadvantage? So I would strongly urge you not to support these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to Councillor Dennison for the background and the context. I found that really helpful, and I do appreciate the difficulties of having to work constructively with another body in a really to and fro kind of way. I absolutely won't be supporting this. I won't be endorsing a recommendation that throws out our own rule book when it comes to fair appointment processes and public money. If this fails, I do have an alternative, that the Electoral College be requested to provide an alternative recommendation that is in line with the appointment of directors policy as set out in 3.2 of the report. But I would also like to say that this is no reflection whatsoever on any of the directors of CEDA. I'm purely concerned about the process by which we appoint them being above reproach. And without a fair appointment process, by nature, it's an unfair appointment process, in my view. 6 months ago, the story was that we need to avoid a fair process now so that we can do a fair appointment process later. And now it is later. And the optics of that are that the view is we still want to avoid a fair appointment process. So I take the consistency point. I think that is valid, but also one of the existing directors was recently reappointed through a full appointment round, as well as a new member. So I'd suggest that our policy is working quite well in that space where it is applied. I think the scope of exceptional circumstances that comprise needs to be well defined. I'm keen for a review of the policy, and I will have an additional recommendation that we do undertake a review of that policy. I think it's already quite flexible. I'd like to see it tightened up, actually. Otherwise, we've left ourselves an out with a policy which allows for exceptions for any old reason. Why have a policy, you know? I think it is far better practice when our appointment and reappointment processes and the criteria are really well spelled out so that everyone knows what to expect. Present, I think we seem to have a steep threshold, loose definition that leaves room for a perpetual situation, perpetual reappointments on quite flimsy grounds, and we could be setting a precedent for that with this. So it's to me, if it's not full and fair and transparent, I'm not on board. So if this fails, I'll move an alternative, and I'd urge you to support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hapita.
Thanks, Madam Chair. It's very hard working in an electoral college where you're working with another council and you're on equal footing with them, even though the funding is different. But we're on equal footing with them. We're on a partnership. It's not a mother-son relationship. It's an equal partnership relationship. And that's how we're treated with them. And we put the money aside and we work as a partnership with them, and we try to work around the table with them. And we've both got different ways of dealing with things. And that's how we try to deal with it when we are discussing these kind of roles to try and get people onto boards. And it is hard. It's not easy. And the people, I know we don't want to talk about people, but these are three people that are very good people. And I feel like if we throw them out with the bathwater, we will lose people going forward. And I know you're shaking your head, but at the end of the day, we will lose people if we do throw them out. So I would look to supporting these recommendations, because we will lose them if we do go down a different track. It's not what we agree with. None of us agree with this policy. We want to actually have a policy that we can all agree with, because it is a deviation from our current policy, as Councillor Bowen pointed out, which was great to point that out. But we do need to look at our current policy. But at the end of the day, this is a joint committee with another council. We have to stomach it and we have to live with it. But it doesn't go with our values sometimes, but we have to work with it. So please support it. Please support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor. This doesn't like my fingers.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I totally agree with the points that Councillor Johnson and Councillor Zabellan have already outlined, so I won't repeat those. But just to address the issues that Councillor Harper has just raised, I won't be supporting these, and certainly will second the alternate that Councillor Zabellan has outlined and was circulated to elected members at lunchtime. In not supporting these recommendations, let me be clear, I totally acknowledge that the members that are proposed to be reappointed, I acknowledge their work and acknowledge that they are valuable people on the board currently. And there is no suggestion that we would be throwing them out with the bathwater. What we would be suggesting, if we did choose to follow our policy, which, as Councillor Harper said, does go with our values, we'd be following our values and our policy, we would be encouraging those current members to put themselves forward for consideration. And the whole point of the policy is for us to ensure best skills, knowledge and experience, and certainly the continuity of the strategic direction, I'm sure, would be a part of the consideration of the Electoral College when they made that choice, that make those decisions following our policy. I certainly would support a re-looking at the policy, but not to loosen it, but to make it more explicit. So often it's being proposed to this table that we make an exception or consider something in exceptional circumstances when it really isn't in exceptional circumstances. And I think there is the risk where we know people, we get to know people who are on the board, and there's a sense of loyalty that we want to keep them and not rock the boat and not put them through another process. But, you know, as has been pointed out, we need to do this in a transparent and fair way, and that sometimes does involve needing to say, yes, I would like to continue to do this role, and certainly if they're the best people for the job, they'll be reappointed. So I think there's absolutely nothing to be lost here, but there is something to be gained by actually following our process.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm a little bit torn on this one, actually, because in policy terms, absolutely, I agree. We should be following our own policies. The problem we have is our policies aren't very good at the moment, and they're hard to work with. And so a review of this policy, I think, should also include a review of our PNCC appointment of directors policy, if we get to that stage. And I speak as somebody who you all know has danced on the pinhead of exceptional circumstances a few times to avoid going out to the market. And I think there are times when that is appropriate, and exceptional circumstances might need some work to describe what they are, but there is definitely that time. But this seems to be riding a truck over that bridge of going, it's all exceptional circumstances, we just don't want to go out to market. And I understand why you might not want to. It's a huge amount of work. You're putting together the interview panel, finding time to do that, running the processes that sit alongside it. I do it every year for the CCOs. I know exactly how hard that is. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. As has been said by others, this is public money. In CEDA's case, it's a lot of public money. And we want the strongest board we can get. We've been very well served by our boards, no question about it. But we don't know that those people, those three excellent people in front of us, are in fact the most excellent people who want to be on the board of CEDA next year. We don't know that because we've not asked the question. So, yeah, I think I will be voting against these recommendations, and we'll look to support a review of the policy and triggering a policy response to this, which the officers set out in the note, in the paper, which is that we go to market.
Thank you, Councillor. And with no further comments, I'm going to ask no right of reply. Okay, everyone, if we could to vote on this, on all 5 of those points, that the council appoint, I think we can read all that, can't we? Yes. Point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you. And that, did you? We've, no, we'll go back. Okay. Thank you. So that has failed 8-5. Thank you very much. Councillor Sabellin? Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Won't talk at length. I think it's been pretty well covered. Just that this alternative recommendation is that the Electoral College be requested to provide an alternative recommendation that is in line with the appointment of directors policy, as is outlined at 3.2 of the report. And secondly, an additional recommendation that the CE undertake a review of the appointment of directors policy, with particular regard to the scope of definitions. It shouldn't be too much to ask that we're in line with our policy, and it shouldn't be too much to ask that we hold fair appointment processes, and it shouldn't be too much to ask that all candidates for these roles undergo a fair appointment process, whether they're an incumbent or not, just the same as everyone else. If it's not a fair appointment process, then it is an unfair appointment process. I do also just want to extend my thanks to Councillor Hapeta and Councillor Dennison, so I think I appreciate the difficult position that you are in. Thank you. I ask for your support.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bowen?
Question to the mover, if I may. The appointment of directors policy is our CCO policy, so we'll also need to specify our appointment of CEDA directors policy. So just if we can...
Yes, thank you. I do have that
both.
policy here. I think it is called the CEDA appointment of directors policy. If we could add that in, that would be a useful clarification.
To review both.
Thank you.
Appointment policies. Thank you. Yeah, just to say, I do support us reviewing this. Policy is policy, whether it's bad policy or good policy. It's fine to recognise that in this forum, we have an opportunity here to apply our policy, unpopular though that might be. We'll see what the Electoral College come back with for the CEDA appointments, but I'm very keen to see us review both policies to try and get some better outcomes than the one we're currently experiencing.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Naylor.
Sorry, just a quick point of clarification. We've added CEDA appoint. I think Councillor Bowen did say both, so should we have both in the recommendation? I think perhaps it would be good to be explicit. I'm happy with that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So we're about to vote on 2 items, both moved by Councillor Sabellin and seconded by Councillor Naylor. Firstly, that the Electoral College be requested to provide an alternative recommendation that is in line with the CEDA appointment of directors policy as set out in section 3.2 in the report. And secondly, that the Chief Executive undertake review of the CEDA appointment of directors policy and the appointment of directors policy, PNCC, with particular regard to the scope of definitions. Councillor Harpter.
Just a question to Hannah. How does that line up with the MDC meeting tomorrow?
Through you, Madam Chair, I will report to Manawatu District Council this afternoon on the decision, and then they will need to decide what they do next. There won't be much point in them putting up the same paper.
So do we need to lie our decision on the table, or what do we?
No, we'll call the Electoral College together and we'll come up with a plan.
Okay, thank you.
Right of reply? No, none. Thank you. If we can be ready to vote on these two matters, thank you. It has been passed unanimously. Thank you. I'd now like to move that we exclude the public to go into part 2. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Dennison. And with that, we will finish part 1. And can we vote on that? Thank you. Ooh. Yes, I moved it. Sorry, didn't mean to be so quick there. Yes. Yes. Thank you. So could we please vote on that, the exclusion of the public? Thank you, everyone. That's passed unanimously. And in fact, I'm going to give us a 5-minute break. And if we can get started in 5 minutes. Thank you.